A wind turbine is a device that converts the wind's kinetic energy into electrical energy. Wind turbines are manufactured in a wide range of sizes with either horizontal or vertical axes. It is estimated that hundreds of thousands of large turbines in installations known as wind farms now generate over 650 gigawatts of power, with 60 gigawatts added each year. They're an increasingly important source of intermittent renewable energy and are used in many countries to lower energy costs and reduce reliance on fossil fuels. Before starting the video, be sure to smash that like button and subscribe to never miss out on any of our videos. The wind is one of the oldest known sources of power used by humans. Ancient societies used wind for transportation. Sails on boats helped early humans explore their known world. Once harnessed by organized societies, wind power became a crucial element in the development of trade, the spread of ideas, and the migration of people. Wind transportation connected the diverse civilizations of the ancient world, allowing for the mutual exchange of goods, ideas, and cultures. The wind remained the dominant source of power for transportation until the widespread adoption of steam power in the late 19th century. Wind power continues to be one of the most promising renewable energy sources. Over the last decade, the wind industry has seen exponential growth, and wind farms are popping up all over the world. It's currently the renewable energy source that can best compete with fossil fuel power plants in some regions around the world. The clean, safe energy it generates is already just as cheap as coal. One study claimed that, as of 2009, the wind had the lowest relative greenhouse gas emissions, the least water consumption demands, and the most favorable social impacts compared to photovoltaic, hydro-geothermal, coal, and gas. Smaller wind turbines are used for applications such as battery charging for auxiliary power for boats or caravans and to power traffic warning signs. Larger turbines can contribute to a domestic power supply while selling unused power back to the utility supplier via the electrical grid. Wind energy development counts thousands of years, that is, from the starting point of the very first vertical axis wind machines operating on the basis of drag forces up until the current time, during which wind turbines under development have reached the scale of tens of megawatt. The constant evolution of the wind power concept throughout this period may be reflected in the most straightforward way by the fact that we're now arguably entering the time of fourth-generation wind power machines. From the early times of wind power exploitation, when the first vertical axis windmills were used for grinding, to the times that electric power generation lies on the rotation of huge epoxy-based blades reinforced with carbon fiber and the exploitation of offshore potential, humankind has encountered numerous types of wind machines and designs which have always found an important place in the puzzle of technological development. Aesthetics is often a primary reason for expressed concern about wind energy projects. Unfortunately, few regulatory review processes adequately address aesthetic issues, and far fewer address the unique aesthetic issues associated with wind energy projects in a rational manner. This section begins by describing some of the aesthetic issues associated with wind energy projects. It then discusses existing methods for identifying visual resources and evaluating visual impacts in general, and it provides recommendations for adapting those methods to the assessment of visual impacts associated with wind energy projects. Finally, this section briefly examines the potential for developing guidelines to protect scenic resources when planning for, siting, and evaluating prospective wind energy projects. Visual impacts are the focus of this discussion of aesthetic impacts, but noise is considered to the extent that it is related to the overall character of a particular landscape. Noise and shadow flicker are discussed further in this chapter under the section addressing potential impacts on human health and well-being associated with wind energy projects. The future of wind energy is bright. By 2050, the agency says wind energy could account for 35% of global energy needs. However, for that to happen, the current capacity of wind energy would need to increase tenfold to 6,000 gigawatts, including 5,000 gigawatt on land and 1,000 gigawatt offshore. Wind power, along with solar energy, would lead the way for the transformation of the global electricity sector, Irina says. Onshore and offshore wind would generate more than one-third, 35% of total electricity needs, becoming the prominent generation source by 2050. In addition, the report notes the accelerated deployment of wind power will need to be coupled with deep electrification and increased energy efficiency. If that happens, we could achieve more than a quarter of total emissions cuts by 2050, or nearly 6.3 gigatons of carbon dioxide each year thanks to wind energy. Such a drastic reduction in global CO2 emissions, however, will necessitate greatly scaling up wind capacity worldwide in the coming decades. This entails increasing the global cumulative installed capacity of onshore wind power more than threefold by 2030 to 1,787 gigawatts and ninefold by 2050 to 5,044 gigawatts compared to installed capacity in 2018, 542 gigawatts, the agency says. For offshore wind power, the global cumulative installed capacity would increase almost tenfold by 2030 to 228 gigawatts and substantially towards 2050, with total offshore installation nearing 1,000 gigawatts by 2050, it adds. Advances in turbine technology are also leading to greatly improved system performances and efficiencies and lower component costs, which means that wind energy is emerging as a genuine competitor to more established but harmful energy sources such as gas and coal. Scientists are also working to build wind turbines that can continue to generate electricity even in extremely high winds. At present, turbines must shut down in storms in order to avoid causing damage to the mechanism. Conversely, turbines that can function at very low wind speeds are currently in development, meaning that urban and suburban sites may become more suitable for the generation of wind energy. The UK government's Energy Technologies Institute (ETI) has proposed a novel, offshore vertical axis dubbed NOVA wind turbine as part of a project to find ways of bringing down the cost of offshore wind power. In Europe, where the density of onshore and nearshore wind turbines in places like Germany, the United Kingdom, and Norway has spurred increasing opposition to new arrays, the floating turbines can be installed over the horizon, out of sight of coastal residents. Floating wind power has enormous potential to be a core technology for reaching the climate goals in Europe and around the world, says Frank Adam, an expert on wind energy technology at the University of Rostock in Germany. The ocean space beyond the reach of conventional offshore turbines makes up 80% of the world's maritime waters, opening the way for floating arrays, Adam says. In the past few years, this technology has made great strides, and Hywind shows that it can work as a whole park, says Adam. Now the farms have to grow bigger to show governments and investors that they're feasible on a really large scale. Currently, the electricity they generate is often almost twice as expensive as nearshore wind turbines and 3 times that of land-based wind turbines. It'll always be cheaper to build turbines on land, and that's where the emissions reduction targets are gonna have to be reached, says R. Andreas Kramer, founder and director emeritus of the Ecologic Institute, a Berlin-based think tank. Even though the floating parks may be cheaper in some cases than fixed offshore wind power plants, the deployable over a larger sea area, it's still maritime engineering, and that makes it expensive to build, deploy, and maintain. Lifespans of the stations are short because of the corrosive nature of the marine environment. The country added more than 1,100 megawatt of new wind power to the grid last year. Electricity from offshore wind energy is cost-effective, reliable, and constantly competitive, Germany's Wind Energy Association stress. Industry analysts say that with well-considered government policies in place, Germany's total capacity of wind energy could balloon to 20 gigawatts within a decade. They argue that by 2035, a total capacity of up to 35 gigawatts in offshore wind power will be required in the country, whose government has promised to shutter all coal-fired plants before that date. Wind power is Germany's most important renewable energy source and contributed nearly 1/4 to total electricity production in 2019, more than any other power source, Clean Energy Wire notes. However, while offshore wind power grew unfettered in that year, the expansion of onshore turbine capacity dropped by 80%, it warns. As a result, industry associations have warned that a persisting slump would have severe consequences for business and employment and could make Germany's emissions reduction and renewables expansion goals unattainable, Clean Energy Wire says. All told, the future will indeed be one filled with wind turbines of every stripe behemoth commercial turbines that are growing ever larger and more efficient to tiny personalized floating power plants that can run a small home, but the changes to the general landscape will be slow and subtle. In the future, wind turbines should be everywhere, but they'll likely be built and subtly and tastefully in various environments around the world, and you will